My name is Angelina. I'm 25, and if someone had told me a year ago that I would be standing in a packed moving van at 3 in the morning, leaving behind everything I had ever known, I would have laughed. I would have thought the idea insane, dramatic, even selfish. But my parents, the people who were supposed to protect me, told me the cruelest words anyone could imagine. Your absence would be the greatest gift for your sister's wedding. Those words didn't just sting. They detonated inside me, a bomb of betrayal that shattered everything I thought I had. I didn't beg, didn't plead, didn't cry in front of them. I packed my life into duffel bags, grabbed the apartment keys from the counter, and walked out, letting the door click behind me like the final punctuation of a sentence I had no intention of rewriting. The night was bitterly cold, wind slapping my face as I dragged the last of my boxes down the stairwell. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the concrete stairs themselves wanted to hold me back, to remind me of what I was leaving behind. But there was no hesitation, no doubt. For years, I had been invisible in the family I was born into, a shadow behind my sister's laughter and my parents' hollow praise. I had endured favoritism that was cruel in its subtlety, words that cut like knives hidden behind smiles, and expectations I could never meet. But tonight, as I slid the last box into the van, I realized something terrifyingly liberating. I no longer needed their approval. I no longer needed their love. I had only one gift to give myself, the gift of freedom. The next morning, I sold the apartment, froze the joint account, and erased the faint traces of a life that had been mine in name only. The smell of ink on contracts and the metallic bite of the bank keycard felt like chains snapping. I had made my exit official, irreversible. There was no turning back, and I didn't want to. I set my sights on a new life across the country, a place where my worth wouldn't be measured by the shallow judgments of people who never saw me. Washington had been my cage. California promised possibility, even if it meant facing the unknown alone. Driving away from the city that had always felt like a cage, I remembered every slight, every whispered criticism, every time my opinions were dismissed as if I were invisible. I let the memories fuel me. By the time the skyline faded behind me, I had begun constructing an invisible map of revenge, not the kind that required violence, but the kind that left scars deeper than any punch, the kind that would strip my parents and sister of the comfort they had taken for granted. I didn't crave their destruction out of hatred. I craved acknowledgement, the proof that I could rise, and they would witness it powerless, forced to confront the reality they had ignored for decades. In California, the city smelled different, alive in a way Washington had never been. Salt in the air, the faint tang of ocean, and a bustling chaos that promised anonymity yet opportunity. I rented a small apartment on the edge of the city, bare walls waiting to be filled with memories I would choose to keep. Each box unpacked, each piece of furniture arranged, became a declaration. This life belonged to me, not them. I enrolled in classes, joined professional networks, and began meeting people who didn't carry my past on their shoulders, people whose judgment wasn't clouded by favoritism or resentment. For the first time in my life, I could breathe without guilt, without apology. But the ghosts of my past weren't silent. Calls and messages from my parents tried to pierce the fragile calm I had constructed, their voices a mixture of false concern and subtle blame. "We just want you to think about family," they said, their words dripping with manipulation. I learned to hang up before my emotions betrayed me. I learned to reply with minimal words, carefully neutral, a wall of steel I had built around myself. Every time they tried to reinsert themselves into my life, I felt the old anger flare, but now it was controlled, strategic. I didn't want to argue, I wanted to plan. Every slight, every manipulation became a note in a symphony of future reckoning. Months passed. I found a job that challenged me, friends who respected me, and a city that didn't know the shame my family had tried to bury me under. I built routines, filled my life with small victories, and allowed myself the luxury of dreaming. Yet every success was tinged with a thought. They had dismissed me, but soon they would learn that their cruelty had forged me into something stronger than they could imagine. Every meeting, every presentation, every late night at work became part of my arsenal. I wasn't just surviving, I was preparing. The opportunity came unexpectedly. My parents, in their prideful arrogance, invited me to a family gathering under the guise of reconciliation. I considered ignoring it, letting their ignorance persist. But then a plan formed. I would attend, not as the broken girl they had dismissed, but as someone reborn, someone they would recognize only too late as the person they had wronged. I would walk in with confidence, with evidence of my accomplishments, with subtle reminders of the life they had tried to erase. Their shock would be my opening. Their disbelief would be my leverage. Every word, every gesture, would be a calculated strike in a game they had never realized they were playing. As the day approached, I meticulously prepared. Photos, documents, anecdotes, small, seemingly casual details that when delivered at the right moment would dismantle the illusion of control they had maintained for so long. I rehearsed my tone, my expressions, the balance between politeness and quiet dominance. Every text from my parents now felt like a taunt, every question a setup for the revelation that would leave them speechless. The thrill of anticipation coursed through me. For the first time, I felt truly alive, not just free but powerful. Finally, the day arrived. I entered the house where I had grown up, now alien to me, and felt the eyes of my parents and sister weigh me down. Their smiles were tight, forced, their confidence was brittle. I didn't speak immediately. I let the tension build, allowed the silence to stretch like a string pulled taut. And then, slowly, deliberately, I began to recount my journey. The years of neglect, the small humiliations, the favoritism, and the moments they thought I hadn't noticed. Every anecdote landed with precision, every pause, every inflection designed to make them squirm. Shock turned into disbelief. Disbelief morphed into defensiveness, and I smiled inwardly, savoring the moment. I wasn't angry anymore. I was above anger. I was clarity, truth, and power distilled into a single presence. I watched as my sister shifted uncomfortably, as my parents' eyes darted, as the reality of their failure pressed down on them. I had left to save myself, and now, witnessing their realization, I understood that freedom was the ultimate revenge. By the end of the evening, I had made my point without raising my voice, without threatening, without malice. My absence, once considered a gift of peace by them, had become a weapon of reckoning. I had vanished from their world, and in doing so, I had returned stronger, unbroken, and unafraid. The lesson was clear. Underestimate me, and the consequences would unfold in ways they could never anticipate. Walking back to my apartment that night, I felt the weight of the past lift further from my shoulders. The city lights glittered like promises, each one a testament to the life I was building. I was no longer the girl who bent to their whims, who silenced her voice for approval that would never come. I was Angelina, 25, unstoppable, and finally, fully myself. And as I closed the door behind me, locking it with a finality that mirrored the click of the Washington apartment door months ago, I whispered to the empty room, "This is only the beginning." They thought I had vanished, that my disappearance was just a temporary rebellion, an emotional tantrum to be endured until I returned, contrite and apologetic. But they were wrong. Completely wrong. I didn't just disappear. I planned, I observed, and I waited. The months following my departure from Washington weren't just about survival. They were about transformation. Every morning I woke in California, I felt the weight of freedom pressing against my chest, a new rhythm pulsing through my veins. I was untethered, unclaimed, and unstoppable. The first weeks were brutal. Starting over in a city where nobody knew my name meant rebuilding my life from the ground up. I found a small apartment with just enough space to exist and plan. Each night, I sat at my desk, not scrolling mindlessly through social media, but mapping everything. My parents' habits, my sister's patterns, the family dynamics I had absorbed like poison for 25 years. Each memory of dismissal, of favoritism, of silent humiliation became fuel, sharp and precise, hunting my mind into a weapon. I found work in a small marketing firm, one that allowed me both anonymity and opportunity. My colleagues knew nothing of my past, nothing of the pain I had endured, and I let them think I was just another young woman trying to find her footing. Little did they know, I wasn't merely trying to survive. I was preparing to dominate. Every project I took, every presentation I delivered, every late night I stayed to perfect details was a rehearsal in strategy, discipline, and power. I became meticulous, calculating, almost frightening in my dedication. But even as I built my life, my mind never rested. My parents' voices haunted me, distant yet cutting, reminding me of their cruelty, of the favor they had shown my sister, of the disdain they had draped over me like a shroud. I imagined scenarios where they would confront me, beg me back, or simply watch me thrive and feel powerless. And in each scenario I learned. I adapted. I plotted. Friendship became a tool as much as a refuge. I surrounded myself with people who were ambitious, intelligent, and loyal, not because they needed me, but because they recognized my worth and I recognized theirs. These allies became extensions of my vision, small cogs in a carefully engineered machine of future influence. I observed them as they observed the world, learning from their perspectives, refining my own strategies. I was no longer reacting, I was orchestrating. Then came the first tangible strike. My parents had opened a business account with my name as a joint holder, a legacy they thought would tie me to them forever. They underestimated my foresight. With calculated precision, I froze the account from California, cutting off their access and leaving a note. "I've taken control of what is rightfully mine." I didn't wait for their reaction. I watched the subtle chaos unfold through intercepted updates, the panic disguised as calls to lawyers and frantic texts. It was beautiful, quiet, elegant, devastating. My sister, oblivious to the storm brewing beyond her perception, continued planning her wedding as if my absence had been the final gift they imagined. But I had no intention of staying invisible forever. My plan wasn't just to disappear. It was to return as the undeniable force they had never expected me to become. I began documenting every insult, every slight, every manipulative tactic my family had wielded against me. These were not merely memories, they were evidence. Proof of years of toxic control and false narratives that I would wield when the time was right. California became my laboratory, my playground, and my arsenal. I mastered social dynamics, financial tools, and legal avenues that could shift the balance of power in ways they would never anticipate. I built networks, infiltrated groups where my family had influence, and positioned myself to become a quiet, unseen threat. Every coffee meeting, every handshake, every carefully constructed LinkedIn profile was a brick in the fortress I was building. A fortress that would shield me and give me the vantage point I needed to strike. But I didn't stop at logistics. My emotional resilience had to be ironclad. I attended therapy, practiced mindfulness, and honed my instincts. I could no longer allow anger to cloud my strategy, no longer let impulsive emotion betray my vision. Each step forward in my personal growth reinforced the armor I had built, making me stronger, sharper, and ready for the moment when I would emerge fully unmistakable and unshakable. Months became a year. Invitations to social gatherings, networking events, and professional opportunities poured in. I walked into every room with confidence that radiated, making subtle observations, planting seeds of influence, and always returning home to refine my plans. The city that once felt intimidating had become my playground, a laboratory where every interaction was data, every connection a potential advantage. I was learning the power of presence, of timing, of subtle persuasion. And yet I never forgot my ultimate goal. The family that had discarded me, that had underestimated me, would see the results. My sister's wedding, my parents' smug satisfaction at my absence, it would all become the stage for revelation, for confrontation, for the unveiling of the woman they had ignored. I was patient. I was strategic. Every small victory in California, every achievement, every skill acquired, every ally recruited brought me closer to the day I would walk back into their lives, not as the discarded daughter, but as the unstoppable force they had unknowingly created. Then, unexpectedly, an opportunity arose. A distant family friend, someone who had influence in both Washington and California, reached out to me, offering insight into my family's latest manipulations. It was an invitation wrapped in subtle provocation, a test of my readiness. I accepted, not out of curiosity, but because every piece of information, every whisper of their world, was a weapon I could use. Through careful questioning, subtle nudges, and controlled revelations, I learned of their continued favoritism toward my sister, their ongoing dismissal of my achievements, and the small cracks in their perceived perfection that could be exploited. With every secret unearthed, every observation noted, my plan crystallized. This was no longer about simple escape or survival. This was about total reclamation of self and authority. Every calculated action, from freezing accounts to building networks, from personal growth to strategic patience, was leading to one inevitable conclusion. They would never see me the same way again. And when the moment came, when I finally revealed the depth of my transformation, the brilliance of my strategy, and the power I had cultivated, they would understand, too late, the magnitude of their mistake. By the end of the second year in California, I was no longer the quiet, overlooked daughter who left Washington in the night. I was a woman fully realized, with influence, resources, confidence, and the beginnings of retribution brewing silently in every calculated decision. My parents thought they had gained peace by losing me. They had gained the storm instead, a storm that was growing stronger, sharper, and impossibly patient. And my sister, the golden child in their eyes, was yet to see how her carefully curated world was about to tremble. I stood on my balcony one night, overlooking the city lights, and felt a profound clarity. I had taken everything they tried to control and turned it into power. I had transformed pain into strategy, betrayal into lessons, absence into leverage. And as I breathed in the cool Californian air, I whispered to myself, "Soon, they will understand. Soon, the world will see the woman they tried to erase." The moment had arrived. I had spent years planning, building my strength, and waiting for the perfect opportunity. My parents and sister believed that my absence had left a void, a silence they could manipulate and enjoy. But what they did not understand was that silence was never weakness. It was the stillness before the storm, a calm that hid a force they would never see coming. I was no longer the invisible girl they had ignored. I was Angelina, and every action I took from now on would be deliberate, calculated, and devastating. I began subtly. Small interventions at first, emails that hinted at mismanagement in family investments, messages that suggested minor scandals, information that would make my parents second-guess their assumptions about control. I didn't rush. Patience had been my ally, and timing would be my weapon. Watching their reactions from afar was intoxicating. Panic disguised as curiosity, defensiveness wrapped in pride, whispers that spread like wildfire. Every response confirmed that I was already winning. My sister remained blissfully unaware, her life moving forward as though I had never existed. I observed her social media, attended events in California that intersected with her world, and used subtle social engineering to plant seeds of doubt and insecurity. A flustered conversation here, a carefully timed photograph there, and suddenly, her confidence wavered. It wasn't just about me hurting them. It was about reclaiming the narrative that had been stolen from me. Every smile she forced, every congratulatory post she shared, every word she wrote on her wedding plans became data for me to exploit. Then came the first direct confrontation, cloaked in civility but loaded with consequences. A distant cousin, someone with a tenuous connection to both my parents and me, unwittingly provided the opportunity. I arranged a meeting under the guise of reconciliation, a chance to reconnect and share updates from California. I smiled, listened, nodded, and stored every detail, every subtle hint of weakness, every admission that could be used later. By the time the conversation ended, I had a dossier of insights, an arsenal for the battles to come. But I didn't stop there. I meticulously monitored financial channels, uncovering errors in their accounts that were previously overlooked. I set in motion a chain reaction, small transfers that appeared accidental, discrepancies that drew attention, questions from auditors that my parents and sister could not anticipate. The beauty of my strategy was in its subtlety. Each misstep appeared organic, the result of poor management rather than my intervention. Yet each one weakened their perceived competence, eroding confidence and creating cracks that I could exploit later. My professional life in California flourished alongside my calculated vengeance. I secured promotions, made connections with influential figures, and strengthened my resources. I never flaunted my success directly to my family. They didn't deserve the satisfaction of knowing, but I allowed my accomplishments to reach them indirectly. Articles in industry magazines, mentions in conferences, and social media presence hinted at a woman transformed, untouchable, and poised. The whispers of my success reached Washington, and I imagined the unease it caused. Every time I heard of their subtle acknowledgement of my rise, my lips curled into a quiet, victorious smile. The personal strikes became more intricate. I exposed family secrets I had gathered over the years to mutual acquaintances, ensuring that truths that had been hidden for decades now surfaced in controlled ways. My sister's friends began questioning her integrity. My parents' social circle noticed inconsistencies, and subtle tensions spread. I did not need confrontation. The environment itself did the work. Their credibility, carefully cultivated over years, began to crumble under the weight of exposure and rumor. I watched, fascinated by the slow but inevitable collapse. Then came the first public humiliation. My parents had organized a gala for an anniversary, inviting extended family, friends, and community members. I arrived not as a rebel, not as a wronged daughter, but as a poised, confident, undeniably accomplished woman. Every detail of my appearance, every glance, every carefully modulated word was a strategic strike. I mingled, listened, and subtly dropped hints of achievements and insights they had never anticipated. Conversations shifted, whispers started, and by the end of the evening, my presence had seeded doubt, envy, and disbelief. It was not vengeance for vengeance's sake, it was a demonstration of power. I had been invisible, dismissed, and belittled for decades, but now I moved through the world with a presence that demanded attention and respect. My family, once so confident in their control, were forced to confront the reality they had ignored. I was unstoppable. And the best part, they didn't know where the next strike would come from. By the end of the third chapter of my life in California, I had achieved more than personal growth or financial independence. I had become a strategist, a quiet architect of retribution, a force unseen but deeply felt. I had taught myself patience, precision, and control. Each step, each connection, each subtle intervention was a thread in a web that would eventually ensnare those who had once tried to erase me. I walked through my apartment late one night, reviewing notes, reflecting on the victories, and anticipating the next moves. A plan was forming, more intricate than any before. I would escalate, move beyond subtle manipulations into calculated exposure that would leave my family and sister questioning every decision they had ever made, every assumption they had ever held. And I would watch, calm and composed, as they realized the consequences of their actions. The night was quiet, but in that silence I felt power coursing through me. My revenge was no longer a dream, it was unfolding in real time. I was patient, I was ruthless, and I was ready. And I knew with absolute certainty that the storm I had begun building would leave nothing unchanged, nothing untouched, and nothing unreconciled. The calm before the storm had long passed. By the time I was fully settled in California, my plans were no longer theoretical. They were kinetic, unstoppable, and meticulously precise. I had built a life that thrived on observation, subtle manipulation, and quiet influence. But now, it was time for the storm to strike. I wasn't here merely to survive or succeed. I was here to reclaim what had been stolen, to dismantle the illusions my family had held for decades, and to watch as their world collapsed in ways they had never imagined. I began with finances. Months of covert research and calculated interventions allowed me to exploit vulnerabilities in the family's investments, accounts, and assets. Transfers that appeared accidental, mismanaged statements, and subtle errors magnified by careful nudges created fractures in their empire. My parents, who had once controlled my life with invisible chains, now grappled with the tangible consequences of my strategic foresight. Every call they made to accountants, every frantic meeting with lawyers, every whispered panic in the corridors of their business empire was another pulse of satisfaction in my chest. But this was only the beginning. I moved next into social perception, the realm my parents had always valued above all else. Invitations to charity events, gala dinners, and family networks became my stage. I didn't flaunt my achievements overtly. I allowed them to be discovered like breadcrumbs leading to an inescapable revelation. Every compliment I received from influential people, every recognition I garnered in professional circles, reached them indirectly. They were forced to confront my transformation without direct confrontation, a slow, undeniable erosion of the facade they had built. My sister was the next piece. She had lived in the shadow of favoritism, basking in the approval I had been denied. I started exposing subtle truths through our shared acquaintances, truths she had assumed invisible, truths that reshaped her image in the eyes of friends and colleagues. Rumors seeded strategically, small confessions dropped carefully, moments of her incompetence amplified by social observation. She began doubting herself, second-guessing every decision, every smile she had once believed carried power. The once untouchable, golden child was cracking. Then came the first major confrontation, public yet controlled. My parents had organized a prestigious family gathering, boasting of their social standing and accomplishments. I arrived not as the timid, overlooked daughter, but as a woman radiating confidence, grace, and undeniable authority. Every step I took, every word I spoke, every glance I cast was calculated to destabilize. I shared stories of my success in California, weaving in subtle reminders of what they had overlooked and dismissed. Their expressions, masks of composure, betrayed cracks of shock, disbelief, and unspoken envy. It was exquisite, their panic hidden beneath forced smiles, their attempts to regain composure only highlighting the disparity between their expectations and reality. I orchestrated conversations with allies and acquaintances, guiding discussions to reveal truths, gently exposing hypocrisy, and hinting at secrets long buried. Each interaction was a precise stroke on a canvas of retribution, every gesture designed to maximize psychological impact. Financially, socially, emotionally, I had dismantled their world without overt violence, without screaming, without overt accusation. Yet the beauty of this strategy was its completeness. Every action was defensible, every consequence plausible, yet cumulative impact unavoidable. By the end of the evening, my parents and sister were forced to confront what they had long denied. Their underestimation of me had been catastrophic. But I didn't stop there. I began documenting their reactions, capturing moments of confusion, shame, and realization. These records weren't for vengeance alone. They were insurance, a testament to the precision of my strategy, proof that the storm they had ignored had arrived. Each recording, each written note, each observation became part of an intricate web of accountability. The world, my world, was now aligned to witness the culmination of years of injustice reversed. Meanwhile, my personal growth surged alongside the unfolding chaos. California had taught me resilience, strategy, and the power of patience. I navigated high-pressure professional environments, cultivated influential networks, and mastered subtle persuasion. Every skill acquired was a tool in my arsenal, every connection a vector for influence. I had evolved into someone who commanded attention, demanded respect, and orchestrated outcomes with precision. The girl who had been dismissed at 25 in Washington was gone. In her place stood a woman unstoppable, indomitable, and fully aware of her power. The next move was subtle yet devastating. I engineered financial exposure in one of my parents' joint ventures, leveraging documents, mismanagement, and legal insights. The discrepancies, though minor individually, compounded into a crisis that could not be ignored. Auditors called, meetings convened, and panic subtly infiltrated every decision-making process. They were scrambling, reacting instead of controlling, and I observed from a distance, savoring the precision of every ripple I had created. Simultaneously, I orchestrated social revelations. Stories of past favoritism, subtle manipulations, and hidden deceptions were shared strategically with key members of our extended social circle. These disclosures, gentle yet undeniable, began eroding the carefully constructed image my parents had maintained for decades. Their credibility, once untouchable, was now fragile, susceptible, and crumbling. I was careful to remain unseen, the architect behind the upheaval, a shadow force they could neither anticipate nor confront directly. The emotional impact on my sister was immediate and profound. Her carefully curated world, where she had always been the favored child, began to fracture under the weight of subtle exposures. Friends whispered doubts, colleagues raised eyebrows, and small seeds of insecurity blossomed into persistent questions she could no longer ignore. She turned to my parents for reassurance, only to find them consumed with their own crises, unable to offer guidance or stability. For the first time, she realized the comfort she had taken for granted was built on fragile lies. By the time the month ended, the family that had once believed they controlled my narrative found themselves powerless. My absence, initially regarded as a gift, had become a weapon of quiet yet undeniable force. Each success, each strategic maneuver, each revelation was a carefully placed strike, dismantling authority, influence, and assumed superiority. And I watched, composed yet elated. As the foundations they had built trembled under the weight of consequences, they could neither anticipate nor mitigate. I knew the finale was near. The ultimate confrontation would combine every element I had honed: strategy, revelation, emotional impact, and undeniable authority. The family's world would not merely crack, it would shatter, leaving only a clear understanding of the power they had underestimated. My revenge was not impulsive, it was art, precise, relentless, and inevitable. And as I stood on my balcony one night, gazing at the Californian horizon, I felt the surge of certainty. The storm was no longer approaching, it was here. The reckoning was unfolding, unstoppable, and beautifully justified. They would remember this night, this month, this year. And they would finally understand. I had left, I had grown, and I had returned as a force they could never suppress. It was the day I had been waiting for, the culmination of years of strategy, patience, and unrelenting determination. My parents believed I had moved on, that I was merely a memory softened by time, a distant figure in California who had chosen independence over loyalty. They were wrong. I hadn't just moved on, I had returned as a storm disguised in poise, elegance, and power. Every detail of my appearance, every confident step I took, every calculated word was a message. I had survived, I had thrived, and now it was time to reclaim the narrative they had tried to control. The event was grand, a lavish family celebration my parents had organized to showcase their wealth, influence, and social standing. They believed it would be a subtle display of reconciliation, a gentle nudge inviting me back into a world they thought I had abandoned. They didn't realize the trap I had prepared. I entered quietly, observing every detail: the smug smiles of my parents, the overconfidence of my sister, the obliviousness of relatives who had witnessed my childhood struggles but never questioned their version of the story. I smiled inwardly. Their ignorance would be their undoing. I began subtly, letting my presence ripple through the gathering. Small remarks about projects I had completed, networks I had entered, and accomplishments I had earned in California sparked curiosity. People leaned in, asking questions, whispering praise, and gradually, the room's energy shifted. My parents tried to maintain composure, but the cracks were inevitable. Their questions became defensive, their smiles tight, their laughter forced. Every glance I exchanged with attendees reinforced my dominance, my transformation, and their inability to control the narrative. Then I unveiled the first layer of my strategy. Stories that had been whispered in private, subtle admissions of favoritism, evidence of manipulation, and small deceptions that had once seemed inconsequential were shared tactfully with select attendees. Each revelation was precise, timed perfectly to maximize impact. Gasps of surprise, murmurs of concern, and subtle shifts in perception began to isolate my family socially. My sister, once untouchable, faltered under the scrutiny. Her confidence wavered as friends began questioning the world she had believed to be perfect. The financial strikes came next. I had coordinated with legal and financial experts months in advance. Transfers, audits, and discrepancies I had engineered became undeniable. My parents' control over family assets was subtly dismantled, replaced with uncertainty and chaos. They were scrambling, reacting to crises I had set in motion, while I observed quietly, savoring every detail. The power they had once wielded over me was now in my hands, and I felt the quiet thrill of absolute justice. Every interaction was deliberate. I spoke with cousins, family friends, and influential attendees, weaving in hints of information and success, demonstrating a life built on merit, intelligence, and resilience. They saw a woman they had underestimated for decades, now fully realized, composed, and unstoppable. My parents' attempts to intervene, to mitigate the damage, only highlighted their incompetence. Every gesture, every word, every calculated glance was a reminder of their failures and my triumph. But the final strike was yet to come. As the evening reached its peak, I addressed the room, not with anger, but with calm, undeniable authority. I recounted the journey I had endured, the favoritism, the manipulation, the subtle cruelties, and the life I had built in their absence. Every anecdote was precise, every pause measured, every inflection crafted to leave no doubt. The room was silent, every eye on me, as I painted a picture of resilience, intelligence, and justice. My sister's face went pale. She realized, too late, that the world she had relied on was built on illusions I had dismantled. My parents' expressions were a mix of disbelief, shame, and helplessness. They had created a narrative of control, yet here I stood, fully independent, fully powerful, and entirely untouchable. The revelation was complete. Their assumptions, their authority, their favoritism, all of it shattered. I ended the evening with a final gesture of triumph, a subtle yet powerful statement. I revealed that I had not only survived, but had become an influential figure, respected, admired, and untouchable. Every piece of evidence, every story, every subtle victory I had accumulated over years culminated in this moment. The storm had arrived. Their world, once confident and controlled, now quivered under the weight of reality. Walking away from the gathering, I felt a sense of liberation unlike anything I had ever known. This wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. It was the restoration of justice, the reclaiming of a narrative that had been stolen from me. My parents and sister had been given a gift, just as they had demanded. The gift of understanding that underestimating me was the gravest mistake of their lives. Back in California, I stood on my balcony overlooking the city lights, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. I had left Washington with nothing but a duffel bag and a heart full of determination. I had built a life, executed a plan, and emerged not merely victorious but transformed. I had taken the pain, the rejection, and the betrayal and forged it into strength, strategy, and undeniable power. And as I whispered to the night sky, I knew this was not the end. It was the culmination of one chapter, yes, but my life, my story, my journey of courage and self-discovery was just beginning. The family that had dismissed me would never forget the storm I had become. I had chosen myself over toxicity, strength over weakness, and freedom over compliance. And in that choice, I had discovered not only vengeance, but liberation, purpose, and the truth of my own indomitable spirit. I turned from the balcony, smiling to myself, knowing with absolute certainty. I had vanished, I had returned. And I had won.